I'm Garrett Wilson, and my presentation is going to be on the Superblocks in Barcelona. And just to go through a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm really going to talk about what Superblocks are, the implementation and design of Superblocks as they now stand. Really, what are the goals of Superblocks and why have they been implemented? And then I'm also going to look at the current Superblock effects just in the time that they've been implemented already. And then I'm going to look at the future of Superblocks on architecture and public space and really what this means for urban planning going forward. So what are Superblocks? So basically, as Barcelona grew as a city and really began to modernize, urban planners began to seek a way to better utilize the city's public space. And Barcelona city planners began to look to implement superblocks throughout the city. And basically, I'll touch on this more later, but it involves repurposing old blocks, so taking lots of old blocks and making it into one singular block while blocking off some cars from coming in and putting some restrictions in order to make it more pedestrian friendly. So overall, throughout this whole presentation, I'm going to be exploring a couple of specific research questions now that we know what superblocks are, and specifically going to be talking about how superblocks have altered the public space of contemporary Barcelona, what specific goals, again, those superblocks have aimed to accomplish, and the measurable and immeasurable effects that superblocks have had on residents. And ultimately, I'll be exploring all of these questions kind of through the lens of examining if superblocks have been effective at accomplishing their goals and the impacts they've had on the public space of Barcelona. So looking specifically at the implementation and design of superblocks, and in terms of how they've altered the current layout of Barcelona, there are currently 6 superblocks in operation in Barcelona. The most prominent superblock resides in the Eixample neighborhood, as this was the first superblock that was put in place in 2016. And basically, superblocks cover an area of about 400 meters by 400 meters and are created from residential blocks of about 150 meters by 150 meters. So currently, these residential blocks are surrounded by regular streets, but ultimately, once converted, as you can see right here on the right, superblocks would ultimately restrict car speed to 20 kilometers per hour or ban the cars entirely, all while kind of prioritizing walking and cycling and green space and essentially opening up this public space. It's all about making streets and cities for people rather than cars and different forms of transportation. So the project was, as superblocks have been implemented, the project was initially met with a little bit of skepticism and pushback from Barcelona residents due to worries about it really disrupting the layout of the city. But recent reports have shown that it's actually been kind of welcomed by the residents and they've actually enjoyed the new change to the city just in the short time since things have been implemented. So the city government has put plans in motion to expand the project even further. Ultimately, what they want to do is convert about 60% of the city's current streets to superblocks and create over 500 superblocks in Barcelona. So ultimately, when examining the question of the tangible impact that superblocks have had in the public space of Barcelona, it's pretty clear that both the layout has certainly been altered in specific neighborhoods, but larger alterations are still really to come. So now I want to examine the goals of superblocks and figure out, why do we really want to implement these and what impacts, might it have. So ultimately, the goals of superblocks really stem from the major problems that have been apparent in modern Barcelona. So firstly, just looking at some of those problems, a 2014 study from the Barcelona Institute of Global Health showed that nearly 3,500 premature deaths were happening as a result of heightened air pollution levels in Barcelona. And additionally, noise pollution is also a frequent problem in Barcelona due to excessive traffic. And a 2015 study from the Urban Ecology Department of Barcelona showed that 43% of residents experience unacceptable levels of noise pollution on a daily basis. So ultimately, the idea of superblocks kind of originated while trying to address these modern problems. So superblocks has kind of been pitched as the solution. So thus really the main goals of these superblocks have been to reduce air and noise pollution, reduce traffic congestion, and increase the amount of public walkable city space that's available to residents. Um, in terms of the impacts that studies believe that superblocks can have. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the impacts they've already actually had. But in terms of how well these superblocks are supposed to pan out, the Barcelona Urban Mobility Plan has estimated that it has the potential to eliminate nearly 700 premature deaths caused by air pollution on a yearly basis. Also, this plan has potential to increase public space for citizen use in the city by nearly 71%. So that would be a huge change. Again, really making the cities and the architecture of the cities all about prioritizing people and people's movements rather than the movement of cars. That's really the big theme here. So overall, the goals of superblocks are pretty clear. It's to reduce pollution, reduce traffic congestion, and increase public space and make cities all about people. So looking further, want to take a look at really since superblocks have been implemented in 2016 and more have been rolled out, what have been kind of the preliminary results in a way, and what have already been the effects on residents? So since the construction of the first superblock in the Ashampla neighborhood in 2016, we've already seen impacts and improvements to resident life that are really just beginning to be quantified. Ultimately, these include both health, economic, and environmental impacts to the city. So, a recent study of Gracia before and after the implementation of superblocks discovered that foot traffic in the constructed area increased by 10%, as well as bicycle traffic increased by 30%. But at the same time, vehicle traffic declined by 26% on the interior streets. So this is obviously exactly what the goals of superblocks have been. Really deprioritize cars and prioritize people and bikes and other forms of transportation that are more environmentally friendly like that. So examining just how much the level of pedestrian space has increased just in the last few years since debuting these superblocks, one study estimated an increase in pedestrian space in total from 45% of the city, from 45% of the Gracia neighborhood to 74% of the Gracia neighborhood. So again, we can see this is on its way to accomplishing its goal of really changing what we do with public space in the city and how we allocate it, whether it be towards cars or towards people. Lastly, we've seen in just a short time that superblocks have been in existence, we've already pretty much seen substantial environmental impacts. So recent studies have demonstrated a 42% reduction in nitrogen oxide emissions and a 38% reduction in particle pollution since superblock implementation in certain neighborhoods. And noise pollution levels have also dropped, as average noise levels have decreased from 66.5 decibels to 61 decibels on average. So overall, it's quite evident that in just a short time, superblocks have really had concrete impacts in regards to health, environmental, business, and public life in Barcelona. Now that we've kind of looked at what impacts have already had, we want to take a look at the future of superblocks and what it really looks like going forward from here. So looking at the future of superblocks and really what this looks like. So according to Barcelona's urban mobility plan, the concept of superblocks, since it has now been seemingly panning out pretty nicely, it's planned to roll out nearly 500 superblocks in Barcelona. Ultimately, one of the big goals of this is to decrease the number of private car trips by nearly 230,000 per week. So this is supposed to absolutely revolutionize the public space and kind of how it operates in Barcelona, which is really interesting and how that's going to play out in the future. Um, Additionally, another thing that's pretty interesting is that other municipal governments around the world have started to look to Barcelona as kind of a model of what they might want to design their cities to look like in the future from an architectural perspective, including a lot more public space and really going off the superblock model to change cities. These cities include even huge cities like New York City and Sydney, Australia. they're in contact with Barcelona city government officials to talk about how they can possibly roll this out in their own cities. So, all things considered, Barcelona's introduction of superblocks has really revealed the immense impact that architectural and urban planning projects can have on the health, environment, and specifically alter the public space of a modern city. So that's my presentation. Again, thanks for listening. It was just a really interesting project to look at, again, where Superblocks stand right now, the impacts that they've had, what their goals are, and what it's going to look like in the future, kind of all under, exploring all these questions through looking at how they've impacted public space. So thank you.